The room was still humming with music when I felt the ground slip beneath me, the bright party lights blurring into a harsh, disorienting glow. My granddaughter held my painting the way someone might handle a forgotten receipt, and in that instant, something inside me cracked so quietly, I almost missed it. If you've ever trusted someone so deeply that their indifference felt like a blade, subscribe and tell me where you're listening from. Moments like this leave marks you don't see until later. I stood there frozen, surrounded by laughter that no longer belonged to me, realizing I had somehow become invisible in a life I helped build. That was the moment everything started to unravel. I never expected the deepest sting of my life to come from someone I once held with both hands, as gently as a bird. But that afternoon, standing under the bright decorations of her birthday tent, I felt something inside me crack in a way I could not hide from myself. My name is Elaine Porter, and for most of my quiet years in Asheville, North Carolina, I believed love, steady, loyal love, was enough to keep a family stitched together. But when my granddaughter brushed off the gift I had poured my heart into, treating it like an afterthought, I felt the kind of humiliation that settles deep in the bones. I remember watching her glance at the painting, the one I had spent weeks creating, only for her expression to harden with polite embarrassment. In that moment, it felt as if she wasn't just rejecting the canvas. She was rejecting me. And as the people around her moved on, laughing and celebrating, I stood there realizing how invisible I had become in a life I helped build. What no one knew, what I kept buried for 12 long years, was the quiet sacrifice stitched into every part of that gift and beyond. But this wasn't the time to explain. This was the moment the wound opened, sharp and undeniable. And as I walked away from that celebration, the truth pressed closer than ever, urging me to finally revisit the story of how I got here and why this hurt carried so much weight. It's strange how a single moment of hurt can pull you backward, sweeping you into the years when everything felt simpler, softer. After leaving that birthday celebration, my mind drifted to the mornings in Asheville when my granddaughter was small enough to fit against my shoulder, her breath warm as she leaned into me before school. My daughter was always working long hours. So much of those early years belonged to the two of us. We built a world out of packed lunches, shared walks, and quiet evenings where she filled every corner of the house with drawings. Even then, I saw a spark in her that felt bigger than our little home. She used to talk about becoming an artist, though it was less talking and more dreaming aloud while I listened. I remember watching her lose herself in color, completely unaware of how her joy carried me through seasons that might have otherwise felt lonely. Somewhere along the way, I began putting aside small amounts of money. Nothing dramatic, just quiet sacrifices stretched across 12 years, because I believed her dreams deserved room to grow. But time has a way of thinning even the strongest threads. As she got older, our conversations shortened, our routines faded, and I found myself holding on to memories more than moments. I kept telling myself it was normal, that children grow beyond the hands that raised them. Still, the distance settled heavier each year, and I tried to ignore how it tugged at me. Remembering the warmth we once shared only sharpened the pain of what happened at her birthday. Those memories, so vivid in my chest, made her coldness feel even more final. And that was the moment everything shifted, the moment that led to the humiliation I never saw coming. I remember waking that morning with a flicker of hope. the kind that rises quietly even when you try to temper it. My granddaughter was turning 18, and despite the distance between us, I let myself believe the day might soften something. I spent hours wrapping the painting I had poured months into, smoothing the paper as if gentleness alone could carry the meaning she once understood so easily. By the time I arrived at the rented event hall, sunlight still warm on the pavement, I felt a faint tremble of anticipation in my chest. Inside, the celebration glowed with polished surfaces and expensive decorations, so different from the simple birthdays we once shared at home. Music thudded softly through the walls, and guests floated around in bright clothes, greeting each other with an ease I couldn't mimic. I felt myself shrinking a little as I stepped inside, holding the painting close, hoping it wouldn't look as out of place as I suddenly felt. The gift tables overflowed with boxes and glossy bags. My hands hesitated before placing my own offering among them. I had spent so long crafting that painting, layer after layer of memory, love, and the dreams she once whispered about her future as an artist. It felt like laying a piece of myself down in a room where no one was looking. When she finally reached my gift, I watched her expression shift into something polite and distant. She barely glanced at the painting before moving on, offering me a brief smile that carried no warmth. In that moment, the noise around me seemed to blur. I felt the air leave my lungs in a quiet collapse I tried to hide, realizing she saw me not as the person who raised her, but as someone peripheral and unnecessary. I stood there, surrounded by laughter, feeling more invisible than I ever had in my life. And with that quiet sting settling deep inside me, I slipped out before anyone noticed, carrying the weight of a truth I could no longer ignore, one that would follow me into the reflection waiting later that night. When I got home that evening, the house felt darker than usual, as if it had absorbed the heaviness I carried through the door. I didn't turn on the lights. I just set my purse down and let myself sink into the quiet. The humiliation from the party settled over me in slow waves, each one reminding me how far I had drifted from the girl I once carried on my hip. I thought about the years of lunches packed before sunrise, the scraped knees I tended, the dreams I encouraged while quietly setting aside whatever I could. All of it suddenly felt small against the emptiness I had seen in her eyes. Sitting there in the dim room, I realized how invisible I had allowed myself to become. Not just to her, but to everyone I loved. It wasn't anger that rose first. It was a hollow kind of acknowledgement, the kind that makes you finally hear your own breathing again. Something inside me shifted, faint but real, like a door opening somewhere deep in the mind. I didn't know what it meant yet. I only knew the life I'd been living no longer fit, and that quiet certainty settled just moments before I heard her return, unexpectedly gentle, as if nothing had happened at all. I remember how quietly she stepped into the house that evening, as if the weight of the party had never existed. When I looked up, her face carried a softness I hadn't seen in years, and for a moment, something tender inside me stirred. She moved toward me with an ease that felt almost like the old days, settling beside me as if the space between us had never widened. I wanted to lean into it. I wanted to believe her warmth was real. She began reminiscing about the years we shared in Asheville, brushing lightly over memories I thought she had long forgotten. Hearing her mention those small moments, the walks, the drawings, the afternoons spent at the kitchen table, tugged at me in ways I wasn't prepared for. It felt like being handed a piece of myself I had assumed was lost. Yet, beneath her sweetness, there was a strange carefulness, as though each gesture had been chosen in advance. As we talked, she drifted naturally toward the subject of her future, lingering on dreams of college and programs that sounded expensive. She never asked for anything outright, but the shape of her words carried an unspoken direction. I felt myself softening, pulled by hope, even as something deeper warned me to slow down. It was like listening to a familiar song played slightly off key, comforting, but not quite right. Inside my chest, two truths collided. One part of me ached for this closeness, for the version of her I had raised and loved. The other sensed a quiet distance in her eyes, a calculation I didn't want to acknowledge. I brushed the thought aside, telling myself she was simply growing, that we were finding our way back. But as the evening settled and she wandered off to my desk to use my laptop, a faint unease lingered. Something about her sudden sweetness didn't fully settle, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing a piece of the story, one I would soon discover in the most unexpected way. I walked into the study only to close the laptop she had been using, still warmed by the gentleness of our evening together. For a moment, I felt almost light, as if the past few hours had stitched something back into place. But when I reached for the keyboard, the screen brightened, and an open message window appeared before I could look away. My eyes caught only a few lines, but it was enough to still my breath. I saw her words, not the exact phrasing, but the meaning was unmistakable. She had described her visit as a strategy, a way to present herself sweetly, so I might feel compelled to support her college ambitions. She had outlined the plan beforehand, even timing her approach around my predictable softness. Reading it, I felt as though the floor beneath me shifted, leaving me suspended in a quiet, devastating freefall. A numbness spread through my chest, followed by a sharp ache that radiated outward. My hands trembled, and for a moment I couldn't move at all. It wasn't just the manipulation, it was the realization that the closeness I thought I felt had been staged, crafted for an outcome she had already decided upon. The girl I had loved so fiercely, the one whose dreams I had carried for 12 years, seemed to vanish before my eyes. I stood there grieving someone who was still in the next room, unaware that a version of her I cherished had just shattered inside me. The truth landed heavily. Whatever bond we once had, whatever softness lived between us, had been replaced by something hollow. And in that hollow space, beneath the shock and the heartbreak, a quiet clarity began to form, an early, trembling sense that I could no longer keep abandoning myself for someone who saw me as a resource rather than a person. I sat in the quiet after she went to bed, the glow of the laptop still imprinting itself behind my eyes. The truth I had uncovered settled over me like a heavy blanket, pressing down until I could no longer pretend I was the same woman who had walked into that study. For the first time, I saw the shape of my life with startling clarity. Years of giving without question, bending myself smaller so others could take what they needed. I had mistaken that shrinking for love. As the numbness thinned, something steadier emerged. It wasn't anger, it was recognition. I finally understood that I had been disappearing piece by piece, and if I didn't stop now, there would be nothing left of me at all. My worth could no longer hinge on whether someone else saw it. With that realization, I opened my bank account and moved the college fund into a separate account under my name. It wasn't vindictive. It was a quiet act of survival, a way of telling myself that I mattered too. The money represented 12 years of sacrifice, and for the first time, it felt right to let it serve me. When I closed the computer, the room felt different, still painful, but lighter somehow. I could feel the first shift inside me, a small but undeniable beginning. The morning after everything unraveled, I felt an odd stillness inside me, as if the ache had finally settled into a place where I could breathe around it. On a quiet impulse, I took a photo of the painting, the same one that had been brushed aside at the party, and posted it online. I didn't attach a long explanation. I just let it go into the world, thinking of it as a small release, a way to free myself from the weight I had carried. I didn't expect anything to happen. Yet by late afternoon, my phone buzzed with notifications that didn't seem real. People were responding, hundreds at first, then thousands, leaving messages about how the piece stirred something in them. They described seeing emotion in the brushstrokes, stories in the colors, fragments of their own lives reflected back at them. I sat there reading comment after comment, feeling a warmth I hadn't felt in years. Strangers saw what my own family had overlooked. Then came a message from a gallery curator, someone who spoke of depth and honesty in my work, someone who invited me to exhibit the piece in an upcoming show. I read the invitation twice, letting the words settle into the parts of me that had grown used to being unseen. For the first time, I felt a flicker of pride, not because someone praised me, but because I realized the painting had carried truth, and truth had found its way to people who needed it. As I prepared to respond, a quiet momentum gathered around me, pulling me toward a life shaped not by sacrifice, but by my own voice. And that shift set the stage for what would come next, when my family finally confronted the woman I was becoming. When the painting began circulating online, it didn't take long for my family to notice. My granddaughter was the first to reappear, stepping into my home with a brightness that felt strangely familiar. Too familiar. There was admiration in her voice, but it carried the same careful sweetness I had seen the night she returned after the party. I could feel her circling the edges of my rising recognition, hoping it might benefit her. The ache I once felt at her distance no longer held the same power. Not long after, my daughter arrived, rattled by the attention I was receiving. She spoke with a force that made it clear she felt entitled to a version of me that no longer existed. Her words were shaped by blame, by frustration that I had taken the college fund back, by disbelief that I was choosing myself. As she spoke, I saw something I had never allowed myself to name, a pattern passed down through our family, where I was expected to give until I disappeared. In that moment, the realization settled like a stone in still water. I didn't need to argue. I didn't need to defend myself. I simply stood in my own truth for the first time. I let their disappointment wash over me without absorbing it. The boundary I set was quiet but firm, built from clarity instead of anger. And as they left, carrying their confusion with them, I felt a chapter closing, one I had spent a lifetime trapped inside. What remained was space, finally open, for the life waiting just beyond that door. When I returned home after the months that followed, I hardly recognized the woman unlocking the front door. Something in me had widened. The house felt smaller, not because it had changed, but because my world finally had. I set my bag down beside the easel, noticing how natural it felt to step into the quiet without shrinking. I began painting again that afternoon, not out of obligation or longing, but out of a freedom I had never allowed myself before. The colors moved differently, guided by a hand no longer weighed down by old expectations. Travel had opened me in ways I didn't anticipate. I wandered through cities along the coast, walked through small galleries in towns I had never heard of, met people who saw me without needing anything from me. One of them, a gentle man with a life shaped by his own losses, became an unexpected companion. Our connection grew slowly, without pressure, without the familiar fear of disappearing into someone else's needs. It taught me that love can exist without sacrifice, that closeness doesn't have to cost me pieces of myself. Standing here now, I feel the quiet triumph of becoming someone I once believed existed only in the edges of my dreams. My life is mine, wide, unfolding, and honest. And as I prepare to share the final lesson this journey taught me, I can feel a steady peace settling into place, ready to be spoken aloud. In the end, I learned that losing what I thought I needed made room for the life I was meant to claim. Healing didn't come from being chosen by others, but from choosing myself after years of disappearing. If my story offers anything, I hope it reminds you that your worth isn't measured by who stays, but by how deeply you honor your own voice. We all deserve a life that reflects who we truly are. If you've walked a similar road, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. I read everyone, and your words matter here.